My name is Phil Esposito. I'm part of the ODD team, part of the people organization, and we're going to talk about conflict resolution today. And a couple things we're going to talk about. Certainly, we're going to identify factors that creates conflict. Let's talk about what creates conflict in your workplace. We're going to identify conflict resolution styles. And I did send out like a little assessment. So if you were able to take that assessment, then great. We'll talk more about that. We're going to talk about tools that help minimize conflict. What can we do to minimize conflict? And finally, utilizing tools and language really that helps resolve conflict in the office. And a lot of this is conflict between people, right? You and I, or us and someone else. It's not necessarily managing conflict, although same tools would be used. Again, this is if we have conflict with other people, how do we handle it? So I'm going to throw up a little poll here in a second, but I just wanted to ask you, how much do you enjoy conflict? So you should see a poll on your screen that you're able to answer. And A is love it, and E is hate it, and B, C, and D is somewhere in between. And for those of you getting in, have camera, if you could put it on, so we can see who we're talking to, plus we know you're in class. All right, so we have about 29 of the 39 people who have answered. I'll wait for a few more, and then I'll end the poll, and I'll share the results. My computer has been a little slow. So, all right, a few more seconds. So if you haven't been able to answer, please do. And I'll end it now. All right, so I'm going to share the results. And here's what we're looking at. We're looking at 38% of the people say that they hate it. 29, which is close second, dislike it. 8 people are neutral about it. A few people like it, but no one loves it. Okay. So what does that mean? And, what's the scenario? We're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit. However, let's talk about, I'm going to skip over this, but because of the number of people, but I do want to talk about the third bullet. What kind of feelings? So those of you that certainly dislike it, hate it, or even people that like it, what kind of feelings happens when conflict happens at work? So if you want to chat or unmute and throw it out. What kind of feelings happen when conflict happens at work?
Uncomfortable.
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 Right? Uncomfortable, right?
Right.
Yeah, so it makes us uncomfortable.
Defensive.
Tension, defensive, right? And now it brings low morale. So now certainly stress. Say it again.
I'm very uncomfortable with the conflict.
Yeah. So it brings us stress. It brings us tension. It brings us uncomfortableness. And these are things not only, it's not that we don't like it, but they can affect our health, right? The other thing too is, these are things that you bring home with you. It's not just like when you swipe out at the end of the day, all of a sudden, that conflict goes away. You think about it on the train ride home, so it starts to permeate, into our lives. Okay. And one of the things, if you think about, let me just see some of the reasons for it. All right. So we know how we feel, and it does affect productivity. So some of you are commenting too. Think about the conflict at work. What causes it? Right? So if we're having conflict with our colleagues, conflict within other departments, conflict with customers. Hopefully we're not, but it happens. So again, mute or chat. What causes some of this conflict? Lack of communication. Someone commented already.
Difference of opinions.
Difference of opinions, right? Disagreements. Differing perspective.
Misperception.
Misperception or two people's perceptions, right? Misdirection, unclear instructions, again, ineffective communications, emotions, disagreements, misunderstanding. Absolutely right. All right, so all of this, and a lot of times excessive workload may cause conflict, especially if I feel in some ways I'm doing more work than someone else.
I turned it off. You just gotta go off.
So of course, all of that can cause conflict. Again, amongst people at work. The other things too is we work amongst different people. There may be generational differences. There may be, diverse backgrounds, and all of these things certainly can be a benefit, but sometimes they would cause conflict. So what's the impact of those involved? We've kind of talked about a little this with emotion, but if people are getting stressed, as you mentioned, if people are getting tension, if people are calling out sick, what's the business result? You can just ask for one answer. What's probably going to happen to our business at some point?
Negative productivity, negative profit,
Right.
and negative impact.
And it sounds like a theory that's far out there, but certainly we know what happens here. Someone keeps coming in late. The other employees don't like it and they feel like it's not being addressed. Now then, why should I work so hard? This person comes in late and does whatever they want. So it's reality. And that's the thing we want to be careful of. So just some things, if it goes unresolved, people start calling out sick, people get unhappy, their behavior changes. All right. They get resentful. People start gossiping. This all affects the workplace. And then safety is a concern, right? If people aren't focused, people aren't happy, productivity, job satisfaction, efficiency, and even our reputation and image. What does that mean? If we have conflict, let's say if we have conflict with customers, where are we going to see that almost immediately? Yeah, people have trust issues too.
Social media.
Of course, right? Someone will put a video up as fast as they can, right? And then that's going to resonate, and people are going to see, I told you, so the stakes are high when it comes to conflict, especially with customers, but even internally. And someone commented also, our customers will lose confidence in us. Exactly. So these are things we have to be aware of. Now, when conflict does happen, right? Some of you said just difference of opinion, different perspectives. When that happens, there's things that employees can do. So sometimes they let it linger because they start gossiping. They start, talking about other people. They start pulling away. They don't want to do the work. They start not communicating with the person that they need to communicate to get their job done. So that certainly prolongs it, and the whole point certainly is resolving it, right? The benefit of resolving it. So what are the benefits of resolving conflict?
That's what I wanted.
Throw out a couple, mute or comment. So a happier workplace, right? If we resolve conflict, then we get along better. The work gets done. Avoiding future conflicts is good. But what else? Someone who said different perspectives. Yeah, open dialogue of communication to identify the issues. potentially a safe space now that people can not be afraid to bring up different issues. Now that I know that our differences can be resolved. And here's a good comment too. Sometimes you realize there are other ways forward you didn't think of before. And that's one of the key points. When we talk about different perspectives, because usually some of our issues when it comes to conflict is that I didn't realize I've been doing it one way my whole life, and you're trying to share with me something else. Well, I'm going to be a little resistant to want to change that, right? But over time, I may be able to realize that, and especially if we work through it, we'll come out stronger on the other side. And I think that's the goal, right? A lot of us, especially because our communication skills, we may avoid some conflict, but it's critical that we don't. And then a few other answers: comfortable work environment and learning to solve problems together, which I think is really critical. So let's look. Who's responsible for conflict on a scale from 1 to 100? You can speak them or put them in the comment box. Well, let me phrase the question even a little differently. If you're having conflict and it's giving you tension and stress, and do you feel like calling in sick, or you are calling in sick, who's responsible to resolve that? Responsibility is on you. Yourself, right? Yourself. So it's your responsibility. Yeah, the other person is playing a part of it, and there's some sharing of responsibility. But if you're going home with stress, then it's your job to try to manage that stress. How do you do it? Reduce that conflict. How do you do it? Certainly working out the conflict. Right, so some would say that 100% of the responsibility lies with us. Now, again, if the person is extremely difficult, maybe there's that rare percentage, but if it's truly differences of opinion, and, I think that's one of the biggest things that should come out of this. Differences of opinion are always going to happen. Look at, let's just say, politics, and I'll look back to previous campaigns where, two people could be civil to themselves and say, hey, we just have a difference of opinion, on how we need to do things. So a lot of times conflict is difference of opinion, communication, because I don't know what your goal is or what you value or how you're going to resolve an issue. And you don't know how I'm going to resolve it or what my goal is. And the only way to find out is by asking, right? So what have you done in the past to resolve conflict? Those of you that have been successful, what have you done to resolve conflict?
Have a one-on-one conversation.
Okay, good. Have a one-on-one conversation, right? Not put up walls between your desk and theirs or kicking and screaming. But you got to get to the root of the issue, and the only way really is to communicate. All right, so let's talk about some of the steps. Finding common ground, yes, very good. One of the comments, and we will certainly talk about that. But let's look at a model that has steps, and this is in your material. So if you are following along, on page 7, as this conflict resolution model. And first of all, clarifying the disagreement, get to the heart of the conflict. Why are we even having this conflict? Establish a common goal, right? As someone just said. Discuss ways to meet the goal. Determine some of the barriers to the goal, right? Two parties acknowledge what's brought them into conflict and talk about it. And how do we prevent it happening again? How do we find a resolution? How do we find common ground? At some point, you agree on the best way to resolve it. And then you acknowledge that solution and determine responsibilities. All right, here's what we're going to do in the future. Here's what we can do to check in. So sometimes, and conflict could be work related, and in a lot of times it is. It becomes work-related, then it gets emotional. So all of these steps, though, include communication, right, at every step of the way. So if you're having a conflict, you can always come back to this and say, okay, what's the first thing I need to do? I need to clarify the disagreement. You know, I need to talk. I need to potentially step out of my comfort zone. Yeah, there's a comment that says clarifying the disagreement is really good and overlooked starting point. Sometimes people don't understand why they are disagreeing. Sometimes it's a simple framing of misunderstanding. And if anybody wants to unmute to explain, however, a lot of times conflicts, there's a difference of opinion, and then it starts getting more emotional. So the logic goes out of the way, and now that we're in conflict, it starts to become personal. And maybe the conflict becomes more about the person than the issue. So it is important to clarify that disagreement and say, hey, where did this start? Where did this come from? Any comments so far? Anything to add? Give me 1 second. There we go. So when we talk about communication, let's even take a step back, because a lot of times we're talking to people, we have tone of voice and we have body language. And a lot of times when those are not in total agreement, people get mixed messages. So for instance, if you can see my screen, you can see my face. If I say, you look really good, what was I saying there? If you could read my body language. Anyone need to do it again? You look really good. So what's going on in that case? Are my words matching my tone? And we could, right, so it's not sincerely stated. You know, the question is, who am I saying it to? In those cases, the words that I say and my tone doesn't match. So which is stronger? If all of this adds up to 100%, you know, the whole message, the whole package, from a weight point of view, what weighs more and what percentage would you give to each of these? So what do you think? Throw out some ideas. Obviously, it has to add up to 100%. So what do you think the words might be? All right, someone said 10%. 15, 25. All right, so tone of voice next. That's the tone of your voice. Tone and body, 40. All right, so 20, 40, 40.
So 20.
All right, I'm getting a lot of words, 20, tone and body, 90. Words, 20, 30. All right, so I'm going to show you what the experts say. And if you take a look, so the words are only 7%. So those who say the other two adding up to 90 is almost spot on, right? Body language means the most. And tone is strong too. You know, so it's not necessarily the words you use. And that seems to be some of the problem sometimes. Because some people say, I just asked them what they were doing and they just blew up at me. Well, you think you asked them what they were doing, but the way you asked it implied that they were doing something wrong, you know, or, you know, even may have implied that they were crazy by the way you asked it. So sometimes when we hear, well, I just asked them what they were doing, where they were going. That's all I asked. And then the person ends up, you know, flying off the handle. because not realizing that those words were a small percentage of what was really being said. So let me give you an example. If I were to say, I didn't say you took the money. I didn't say you took the money. What is that sentence saying? If somebody wants to unmute, what does that sentence sound like it's saying?
You're still implying that they took the money.
I'm implying they took the money, right? And yeah, there's a comment there that says, yeah, someone else said it, right? So that's what I'm saying. Doesn't, they probably did take the money, but my whole point is I didn't say it, right? Someone else did.
But you still implied it.
Well, if I said I didn't say you took the money, I may be totally innocent in it. You know, if someone's been, I'll say tattled on, or someone said, hey, Phil took the money. If someone says I didn't say it, that means they're just innocent in the process. If I said I didn't say you took the money, now that's more of implying, right? Do you see the difference? I didn't say you took the money.
You could still have a police report in front or whatever proving that they did, you know, that it still doesn't, hey, you didn't take the money. That's what
Right.
that's what they're looking for. If that's the situation, that's
Yeah.
define your audience. What does your audience want to see or say to avoid the conflict? Know your audience.
Well, that's it. In those two sentences, I didn't say you took the money means I had nothing to do with it. And, you know, I could have had nothing to do with it. I didn't say you took the money. That means I implied it. What about if I say I didn't say you took the money? What is that saying?
The one question is, how do you know whether he took the money or not? So it needs to be phrased in a different way. We have this situation. We need to figure it out how to resolve it, isn't it? So just saying the statement like, oh, I didn't say he took the money doesn't mean anything. If we don't know whether the guy or the girl took the money or not.
That's
so
not
it's a
even the
totally
point.
different issue.
Yeah, my point is really, what am I saying by emphasizing different words? All right.
Okay.
So if I said, I didn't say you took the money, what is that saying? If you heard that statement, nothing else. I didn't say you took the money. What does that sound like? That's implying it, right? I didn't say you did it. I might have implied it, but I didn't say you took the money. You hear that? I didn't say
You might have taken something else.
Right. So my whole point is by emphasizing even different parts of a word, and I barely change the body language, but if you have body language involved, the same words, just emphasized differently, may have totally different meaning. That's all we're trying to say here. It's almost an example of the words don't necessarily carry that much tone. However, if we start emailing, that's where things get complicated. So when you're talking to somebody, you have to realize certainly words are important. We're not saying they're not. However, you got to keep an eye on your tone and your body language.
That's the problem with text messaging and emails. You don't set a tone and there's more body language involved in it.
Right. So now the words certainly carry a lot more. And we all know, right, of examples where people say, you know, I don't like the tone of that email. It's words on a paper, but certainly we still see the tone come through. But when we are communicating with our body face to face, you know, certainly the words carry much smaller weight. Doesn't mean they're not important. Certainly the words we use do hurt and carry some weight. However, sometimes either reading other people's body language, and even though they're saying one thing, understanding that's not how they really feel, or even when you're using your words, making sure that your body language and your tone is also all working together in congruence. All right, so I'm going to show an example, try to show an example. Just give me 1 second. Hold on a second. You know what? Let me stop sharing for 1 sec. Stop sharing, make sure the audio works here.
Hello. Oh, I'm sorry. We're only boarding rows 9 and above right now. You'll have to wait.
Well, I'm in row 8.
Please step aside, sir.
It's just one row. Don't you think it's okay if I...
We'll call your row momentarily. Step aside, sir. Thank you for waiting. We'd like to continue boarding the aircraft now. We're now boarding all rows, please. All remaining rows. Hello. Enjoy your flight.
All right, so that's a good example. I mean, just certainly a playful example, but a good example of tone not matching body language, you know, and in some case, certainly his body language you can read, you know, but what did her body language show? You know, her facial expression. If there was no audio and you were watching that, what would you think of her? Just
The value she put on the person was less than you can express. So that was what was definitely conveyed to him.
But if you looked at her body language, she looked like she was being very professional and nice, right? She was smiling.
Yeah, she's like the nicest lady in the world.
She looked like it.
Yeah.
But now when you put the audio in and you realize what's going on, obviously they're not matching. You know, so it's just a matter of reading other people's tone. And again, this is just an extreme example where someone looks like they're being nice, but certainly that wasn't the case. But if you were either one of these parties, you know, being able to read the other person's body language is what's needed. And again, just an example. So, and we'll talk more about, you know, specific body language and now start using some of the communication. Give me 1 second. Just want to share my screen. So one of the pieces of conflict, certainly, I had to take a conflict assessment. Before we even get into that, there's communication styles. All right, if anybody's familiar with communication styles, it's more how do people communicate, you know, and what does that say about them? What does that say about them, you know, from a communication point of view? For example, some people may say, oh, I don't want to talk to this person because I have to go through like how's your family and I don't want that. I just want to get down to business. All right, where other people enjoy having that communication and enjoy getting to know people before they talk business. Some people may talk with their hands, talk faster. Some people use a lot of hand gestures, you know, and a lot of emotion. Some don't. All right, some people talk slower. So sometimes that in itself could create conflict. All right, because if someone communicates differently, different style than you, certainly that may be a little bit tougher for you to handle, and working with them or talking to them, communicating to them does create or could create some conflict. All right, so that's something to think about as part of our conflict styles. And as we're moving into conflict, think about, is your communication potentially different than somebody else's? And what do? You try to adapt to them. right? But beyond communication styles, then there's conflict styles. So was everybody able to get and complete the conflict styles assessment? I'll stop sharing for a second just to kind of see some faces. If you can, even on screen, or just thumbs up if you are showing your picture. Was everybody able to complete that, which is on but that was sent separately, was the one pager. We've answered some questions, and then from the questions, we kind of came up with a conflict style. Everybody has? Yes, no, maybe, thumbs up, thumbs down. On your thumbs down over there.
I saw a couple of thumbs up before.
Okay, so if a lot of people haven't, then certainly, and if you have material, we're gonna spend some time talking about it. However, there are, all right, good. Some people were able to get through it. There are a number of styles, conflict styles, that may help shed some light on why, at times when you do have conflict, why it's tough resolving it, or why you feel like you can't get through to somebody, or maybe you're just avoiding it. So let's take a quick look. Really what happens when you talk about conflict styles is we all have a preferred style that we operate from. In some cases, you're looking at your own concerns, whether you're being assertive, how are you putting your concerns in front of someone else's, or in some cases, is someone else putting their concerns in front of yours. So in that case, if you're worried about other people's concerns more than your own, you would tend to more focus on them, meaning they win and you lose. All right. And I'll give some examples, but how much do you focus on your needs, or are you more focused on other people's needs potentially first? So for example, if I were to start at accommodating people might seem as people that give in. 1 second, let me move this back. So there may be people that seen as giving in, right? They may not get exactly what they want, but they may let other people get what they want. People who might avoid, they may be viewed as passive. In some cases that may be true, but not always. But whether it's not worth the fight for them right now, or in some cases, they don't like the confrontation, so they avoid it. So there may be times when avoiding conflict works, and there may be other times when avoiding it really doesn't get to the heart of the issue. And potentially, over time, people are going to realize that they can do whatever they want because someone keeps avoiding the tough conversations. If someone's compromising is middle of the road. Let me see where I give in a little and you give in a little. All right. So we both end up losing a bit, if you want to call it winning and losing. And then there's collaborating. All right. When we actually, let's look at competing first. So when we compete, I want to make sure I win. So there are people that it feels like they always want to get their way. And if we work with people like that, or hung around people like that, it's almost like they never want to give in. All right, those people are competitors. And collaboration really is optimal in a sense, especially when the stakes are high in conflict, where how can you win and I win so that we both get what we want? And in a lot of cases, going back to how can we make conflict positive? Differences of opinion, what's the benefit? So if I collaborate in a work environment and we both end up quote unquote winning, what's the benefit of that? What might be some of the benefits? So if I want to do something one way, you want to do it another. And instead of one of us digging our heels in, let's work together and collaborate. What would be the benefit of that? Either chat or unmute.
Everybody gets what they want.
right, we may get what we want, but it sounds like in some cases, if we work together, we'll both get more than what we want, right? Maybe we come up with a better way to do things. Because it's a case where somebody has to quote unquote lose in order for me to win. Well, if we could both win, that would be great. So questions so far? I want to make sure this makes a bit of sense, and we're going to go more into detail of it. But let's just say I'm going to use an example. I use an easier example for now, so it's easy to understand that everybody can relate with. Let's just say if I'm in a case where I have kids, one of my kids wants to go out on Friday night. All right, and I say, you're not going out unless your room is cleaned. Now, if their room isn't cleaned and I let them go out anyway, in essence, they win. And where I say I lose, well, in that case, now that they know that I can't be taken seriously or my rules don't matter, right? If I avoid it, in some cases, you know, I certainly end up losing because they may go out, like if they just walk out of their room and say, hey, I'm going out. You know, in some cases, so what's the winning and the losing? In the case they want to go out, that's their win. My win is getting their room clean, right? So in some cases, if I avoid it, their room's not cleaned. It's a benefit, you know, not necessarily to them, but certainly I don't get their room cleaned either. Now, if they come out and they say, I did most of my room, do you think maybe you can take me? I'll say, well, if that's the case, you do it when you get back. We made some kind of compromise there. But again, the room's not necessarily clean, so the goal is not complete. All right, now, if I just say, you know what, I said if your room's not clean, you're not going out, you're not going out, I win, right? I win, in this case, the argument, but they end up losing because now they're not going out. And then finally, if we say, let's work together, or maybe I'll help you, whatever the case, and maybe you can even get out earlier, right? In that case, we both end up winning because I get something done, I get it done earlier than I wanted to, and they get to go out earlier than they wanted to. So again, just an easy example, but one that everybody would be able to understand. And that's really what we're looking at when we're looking at conflict styles, because there are people, going back to the previous question, right, where one person said that they like conflict a little bit, because looking at differences of opinions, yes, that's conflict. And conflict, there's really a spectrum to conflict, right? We could be yelling and screaming at each other, taking it personal, you know, and that certainly needs to be brought back in. And certainly that's why you need to resolve conflict earlier. However, conflict in work really is a difference of opinion that I want to do it one way, you want to do it another. All right, let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. Let's see what the pros and cons are. Let's see where we can both benefit. All right, and looking back to even, you know, the first step in the process of that cycle really is understanding, you know, that disagreement and clarifying it, because that's the important piece. You know, we may both be able to benefit, but if I don't know your point of view, I'm never going to be able to get to a place where you're going to be happy, and that's still going to have that conflict brewing. So questions, comments, anything that's not clear a bit?
Well, just even explain why you're taking that position. Why clean is important to you can sometimes help the other person. Sometimes not, but at least, you know, another way to express yourself.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of times it's just we make a decision, we communicate the decision, but not why we're doing it. And if we take a step back and say, all right, let me tell you why I want to do it this way, and I start giving some of the reasons, they may say, all right, that makes sense. Let me tell you why. You know, and you ask even, what's the benefit of doing it your way? Why are you thinking that way? And they say, well, here's why. And they give you reasons. Okay, maybe we can come up with something.
I think also,
Both of us. Go ahead.
I think also collaboration is important. For example, let's say the reason why a person doesn't want to clean, for example, a room because the train, Long Island Railroad train, leaves in 15 minutes. He's not going to be able to finish that clean. So when you collaborate and you say that, you know what, I understand that your train is leaving soon, I will help you in your room, but that's the only condition. That's, I think, if I understand it correctly, that's a collaboration when you try to kind of is still gonna happen, but knowing that the person may be late for a train, you help him.
Yeah, and think about it too. It's almost like, let's just say you have a busy time. We have 3 people working. There's me, there's you, and there's a floater that helps both of us. Certainly, it's like we can sit there and argue. No, I should get that. Or better yet, let's say we're getting an intern. And it's like, no, I'm busy. I need that intern. And you're saying, no, I'm busy. I need the intern. And not realizing that if I take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, when's your busy time? And you say in the afternoon, I'm always crazy. I'm like, oh, great. My busy time is in the morning. So maybe they help you, and even I can help you in the afternoon, but you help me in the morning, and then we're both getting what we wanted. But if we just dig our heels in and just say, nope, I'm getting the intern, I don't care. In that case, that's an example where we could have not necessarily got to the heart of the matter if we just dig our heels in and just say, no, no, no. And that's somebody who competes. And I'll give you an example, even from a competing point of view. They say Michael Jordan, like he would bet anything. And he tried to bet somebody in golf. He's like, I don't have my wallet on me. I have no money. He's like, well, what do you have on? He's like, I have a pack of gum. He's like, I'll bet you a piece of gum that I beat you. And his whole point was, I wanted you to know that I took something from you, something that was yours that I took. So that's, someone who's a competitor where and this, in some cases, this is natural. It's not that you're necessarily always trying to win, but it's just a mentality where, no, I'm going to get my way, which is okay in that case. But in that case, there's only one person winning. If we look back to that page, or I'll put the slide back up, if we can get us to a place where we're both winning, that's even better. All right. Questions? Anything to add? Does it make sense a little bit? So if you think about, the question now is.
Excuse me.
Yep.
It's very hard to hear you though. Can you please speak a little louder, or like yeah?
Will do. Yeah, I also turned up my mic before there was some background noise, so I had to lower it. Okay, better?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so, and looking at this chart again one more time. So let's just say, we'll throw out some examples. Then I want some of you to say where you fell. But if I look at, if I'm a manager, or if I'm anyone that, let's just say it's something basic. Let's just say we're sitting here in our cubicles, and the person next to me is being loud quite often, and I'm just like avoiding the situation. I'm not bringing it up. All right. In some ways, they're still going to be loud, and I'm losing because now I can't concentrate because I have to listen to all this. So if I would avoid it at all costs, it definitely is affecting me, and I'm not getting any resolution. All right. If in some ways I now have a conversation with them, now they have a better understanding of where I'm coming from, and maybe they didn't even know it affected me. So, sometimes if some people avoid, now if I avoid a situation because it's not that strong to me, then that's okay. Like, hey, what flavor ice cream you want, chocolate or vanilla? Doesn't really matter. That might be, and I'll call it a conflict just because it's a difference of opinion. But if it's something like safety, that's something you can't, really compromise on, that it has to be, in this case, I have to, if I'm the manager, I'm the person in charge, if I'm the one responsible, or any one of us, it has to be this way. So there's no really budget on something like that. Questions? So I know some of you had gone through it. So what style were you from a conflict point of view? And think about if we were to look at, are there any examples that you can think of where you've thought about it and sometimes, so if I'm a person that avoids conflict, or if I'm always accommodating, I feel like, sometimes I feel like, how come everybody else always gets their way? I need to speak up and get my own way.
Phil, there are advantages of avoiding and accommodating. If you're not always trying to get the credit, but trying to get reach that goal, safety being one, there are ways of trying to get the other person to do what you want anyway, without being that obvious. You don't have to put yourself first, but get that goal for the organization. So you don't have to generate a conflict. There's enough conflict already in our day-to-day life.
Yep. So, yeah, and conflict being, if we take a step back and define it, it really is that difference of opinion. You want to go east, I want to go west. And in that case, the big message here is, well, let's talk about it. Let's figure out why. Let's not just stand on our choices. Let's talk about why you're making the choice. And having that communication is going to really be a benefit.
My dad always say that if everyone always agreed every time, one person's surplus. So, conflict's not always a bad thing. Difference of opinion, is how things got progressed and brought forward. Doing the same thing every time is not always moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think that's the point where in some cases, if, let's just say I'm working along with somebody, they compete, I avoid. We're always handling the situations their way, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, I think we can do this better. I think we can do this smarter, cheaper. But if I'm not bringing that up, but if I bring that up, we get to a point I collaborate where, now both of our needs get looked at and we end up coming up with a better solution than either one of us had individually. And more importantly is I understand you understand me. I understand why you're making that decision. You understand why I want to make my decision. And that communication, starts to build. And now I'm not going home stressed or tension or not liking my job or calling in sick because I am a part of the process instead of being avoided. And some of that is self-avoidance, right? We don't like conflict. So those of you that might have said, I really don't like conflict, I hate it. That's okay. But realizing sometimes you have information to offer and you may not be offering it. And you may even sit back and say, I know they're going to do this and I know they're going to do it wrong, right? And I hear that sometimes. It's like when it blows up, I'll say, I told you so. Well, then maybe it is time to try to step up a little and not wait for it to blow up, but get it right the first time. So you don't have to say, I told you so. So I do want to have a little bit of a discussion about this. I know it's been rather quiet, especially with the number of people on the line. But I want you to have some discussion. So maybe I'll put you in breakout rooms for a couple minutes. And I want you to think about, if you think about what style you are naturally, whether you took the assessment, then obviously that's a little bit better. But if not, then, like where would you realistically fall? Think about some of the conflict you had. And where do you think you realistically fall on the conflict, spectrum? And think about that style. What might be some benefits for you? All right. So if you normally accommodate people, certainly there's some benefits of that. What might be some of the benefits of that? But what changes might you need to consider? And let's use an easy one. If I want to go out to dinner and my wife wants to go to one place and I want to go to another, that's simple conflict. However, when we're done, I might feel like, I really want to go to the other place. I wish I would have. Maybe I didn't assert myself. Maybe I was too passive. All right. So maybe I just accommodated. So thinking about that, how might you need to change? All right. So I'm going to put you in rooms for about 5 minutes. I'll come in and check in. We're going to have 6 rooms, probably about 8 or 9 people. But just for you to kind of talk this through, I know a lot of times for a lot of people on the line, you get quiet and kind of don't get the opportunity to speak. But think about this, think about the styles, and answer these questions, and maybe have one person in each group kind of come back and talk about it. All right, any questions before we break out?
All right, I got them ready.
All right, and if you want to, if you can, maybe take a screenshot of this if you don't have the material.
We can also share into
each room.
Yeah.
All right. So you'll be sent into breakout rooms, and then we'll call you back and we'll tell you like a minute to come back. But just have these discussions. Think about this, and think about in your conflicts, how can you benefit by understanding this a little bit better.
We leave the screen as,
Say it again.
should we log out or should we leave it as it is?
No, leave it as it is. We'll actually compartmentalize you into a room, so you'll see that you'll be invited to a separate.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm sending everybody in right now.
All right. So what are some things that you learned by talking through this? First of all, and I'll kind of throw it out to everybody. Was there anything that you can reference that validates a style? You think back like, okay, I noticed I've done this in this case, or, something that resonated a little bit with you when it came to dealing with conflict.
Helping customers, and a smile goes a long way. The ambassadors that are on the platform, they said, they like customers feel reassured.
Okay.
And they like to see them there. Body language is a big, how people use their body.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too, like even sometimes if you've been, I'll go the other way, if you've been a customer, right? And someone's talking to you, but you can tell they really don't want to talk to you. How does that feel as a customer?
They just don't want to talk.
Right. And they feel like, and you feel what?
That you are not important to that person.
Right.
And that then you don't listen to what they're saying, either good or bad. And that's kind of just a personal, emotional reaction to it.
Yeah. So in some cases, they're not listening to you fully. And now they're giving you information that may be wrong. And now you don't even want to be bothered with them. So you just zone out too. And then again, nothing really got resolved potentially. But it's because of, them not engaging and them not being involved. And that causes some conflict right from the start. So it is important to really, again, you may be saying, how can I help you? But if the body's not saying it, and the tone's not saying it, you may not get as good an interaction from a customer or a colleague that you may be able to get if you're really feeling it. All right, good. Keep going.
Well, I think with customers like that, you just smile and you keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in many cases too, we've had, person might have followed procedure, but the customer said they were rude just because of, what they were giving out from their body language or from their tone. Meanwhile, they did everything correctly. So a little change could have changed the whole perception of that conversation. Good. All right, someone else, anything come up that might make a little sense?
Well, in the breakout room, we found that the style changes with the situation. You know, we're not always just going to be one style based on what's going on. We might have a style that, you know, be competitive, avoiding, or, you know, I might have been accommodating, but there might be a situation that, hey, I need to change the style as long as, you know, depending on the situation. But again, reading the information and picking the clues is very important. That as how you go react as far as managing conflict. There isn't going to be the same cookie cutter conflict you run into, and you've got to have available, you know, tools that you can use and be flexible. That was kind of what we were saying in our group.
Absolutely. And after this, we'll probably take a quick break in a couple minutes, but then we're going to talk about, you know, what are the tools? And it's really that communication, right? It's getting to understand someone else and getting them to understand you and talking about that. Other things to add, other things that came up in the breakout rooms.
The telecommuting and everything else has been, for communication, one-dimensional. It's very hard to express things and try. Sometimes conflicts are harder to resolve when you don't have the tone and the visual interaction with people. So that was one thing that was brought up. That was that really we weren't able to have all the tools to resolve conflicts by just using emails.
Right. And that's common too. You know, there was a class the other day, not related necessarily to conflict, but it was, you know, a lot of us will use email as a preferred mode of communication and not reach out to talk to a person. And again, the email, it's only words. But then again, it's like, well, they didn't get back to me. At least I have proof that I sent it. But still, it's not that interpersonal, you know, communication, number one. Understand where the other person's coming from. You know, if I ask you for a report and you don't send it to me, if I ask you for follow-up and you don't send it to me because you're too busy, you know, and I'm sitting there waiting for email, in my mind, you're lazy and you're not doing it. But if I call you and you say, hey, why do you need this report? Well, this is what I do. Oh, I got something else I can give you. Now, again, that's where that, you know, working together comes in. And sometimes it's a report that you're already doing or something you can already send me that satisfies my need, but you don't know my need if we don't communicate. So you going back to that 0 to 100%, if you start the communication, it may end up that both parties benefit by you trying to resolve it and really understanding someone else's point of view. You know, that's the goal of this program, the goal of resolving conflict.
Hey, Philip.
Yep.
You know, it depends on who you're asking that report for. Okay, it could also be perceived as when you ask, what do you need that for? It could come back as it's none of your business. That's what I asked you for.
Right.
It's
Well,
how you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. That's why that.
You know, some bosses don't want to hear rebuttal or why you're asking for it.
Yeah.
Because that's what I asked for. Regardless if you may have a better report for him or something maybe with images that would benefit them.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear that.
Yeah, and that's why sometimes, again, it is the words do count for something. But you know, if I went to them and said, hey, I'm just curious, I may have another report that I can get to you quicker. You know, what are you using it for? You know, that sounds
that's a much better way of saying it.
Right. Well, that's the point. You know, the conflict comes from sometimes from I'm not getting you what you want, but if I communicate with you and we work together, we end up coming to a better resolution. You get your report quicker. I don't have to do extra work, but I'm never going to learn that unless I have that conversation with you. Other things to add. All right, so it's 11:14. Let's take a quick, 5, 6 minute break. If it take any longer than that, sometimes people forget to come back. So let's be back at 11:20, kind of just a quick fresh air break, get some water, and we'll be back at 11:20. Then we're really going to break into, okay, what communication do we use? What tools do we have? And what do we have here to offer? Some things for you to try. All right. I'll be in the room, so if you have any questions, certainly I'll stay there. But I'll stop sharing my screen. But we'll be back at 11:20, quick break. All right. Welcome back. So one thing I want to get into now certainly is that communication piece that we talked about. So, we understand why conflict happens. We realize that there's a benefit if we resolve it. We see that, we may have a style that sometimes has prevented us from resolving conflict as quick as we wanted, or sometimes that style benefits, but we do want to get to that place where we're collaborating and we're figuring out some of the issues, and we're getting to a point where we resolve it, and now it's a win-win for everybody. So how do we do that? Well, one of the things sometimes is we're going to have to give people feedback on their behavior. All right. So how do you do that easily, quickly, without being, putting too much, especially if you're observing what they're doing, but not necessarily putting emotion to it? Something called the SBI, situation, behavior, and impact. So you're giving the when and the where of the situation. And you can use this for colleagues, or you can use it for employees that report to you. All right. Then describe the other person's behavior. Only mentions the actions that you have observed yourself. All right. You don't want to start giving hearsay, people have said this, or something that you observed. And finally, what's the impact of that? What's the impact to you or your team or the organization? So here's an example. I could say, yesterday when we were leaving the training room, I asked you to make sure the room was cleaned up. Today, the other team came in and they found our materials on several of the desks, which slowed them down by having to clean it and reflected poorly on us as a team. So it's really just a little bit of quick feedback, just so people understand, instead of just saying something like, you didn't do what you were supposed to yesterday, and now this other team wasn't happy. That's not clear. But if I give you clear feedback, all right, here's another example. I noticed this morning you were printing several booklets. I didn't see you fill the printer with new paper. I tried to print about 10 pages, but the printer was empty. Really slowed me down. I wanted to grab my stuff and go, but I had to stop and fill the copier. All right. So again, it really just to make sure that I'm crystal clear on my feedback, and really making sure that I'm communicating clearly if something is affecting the way I'm doing something. So for instance, again, using the example I gave in the report, just telling somebody, hey, last week I sent you a request for a report. I asked you if you could have it back on Friday. I didn't see anything, so I'm not sure if you sent it, but if you could, send that report. If they say, yeah, I sent it, obviously that's another issue, but if they didn't, then maybe I'm going to get to an issue where now let's talk about, let me tell you why I need that report. Let me tell you why I need it back on Friday. And that conversation, if it happens with a tone where we're exploring the situation, may be able to help resolve it. But you have to give that feedback first. That's the first step of the process. All right. Just see. So those are examples. It asks for role play, but I think we'll do that after, because I want to get into some of this. Sometimes with giving feedback, a lot of people communicate what they think is an observation, but they're really passing judgment on it. So an observation is something visible that you could see or something you can hear. It's undisputable. It's an undisputable fact. All right. If you send a report to somebody and it has a bunch of errors in there, and you CC me, I can see the errors in that report. So I can say your report contained 5 errors. Okay. Judgment, now we attach a feeling to that. That starts to become our opinion. And a lot of times we speak like this and we don't realize the difference. So if I said, oh, your report had a bunch of errors, now that's, again, it's not clear, number one, but it's me passing some kind of judgment where if I can say, hey, here are the 5 errors you made, that's a little bit clearer. All right. So we'll use easy examples and then we'll get a little bit more detail. So an example, an apple is red or the apple is red. That's an observation. It's a color. I can see it. The apple is delicious, right? That's a judgment. That's me interpreting, once I taste the apple, wow, this is delicious, but it may not be delicious to everybody. So it's not necessarily cut and dry, quote unquote, fact. We approved our contract yesterday, right? That is indisputable. Somebody may come out of the meeting and say, oh, signing the contract was bad for our union. All right, we may think that's a fact. However, that's a judgment passed on the signing of the contract. You completed all your tasks on time. Fact, I asked you to do it by 1 o'clock. You did it. Okay, great. You're the best at completing tasks, or you always complete your tasks. That would be a judgment. And steer clear of words like always and never. All right. Like I said, what happens is we start to communicate with people and someone says, well, you're always coming in late. And if that person tells me, no, remember last week I was here 1 day early. Well, there goes my whole always argument. When I say argument, it just means now you're not going to take me as serious because now we're going to get stuck on. You say always, it's not the case. Okay. So it's important to realize, because this is one of the issues where some people will, like I say, get themselves into trouble. But when they're trying to communicate and they think they're being clear, that they'll turn people off because it's now starts to become a judgment. All right. So I'm going to give you a little quiz here. I'm going to say a statement, and I want you to tell me if that's an observation or a judgment. All right. So if I said, I saw you with that new hire and you weren't paying attention to them. I saw you with that new hire and you weren't paying attention to them. Is that an observation or a judgment? So I'll let some more people answer. Give a couple more seconds. All right, so I'll end that and I'll share the results. Now this is just interesting because, and sometimes if you take a step back and say, okay, how do we measure what you're saying? So I saw you with that intern, you weren't paying attention to them. That's actually a judgment. Okay, because not paying attention is not something you can really measure or observe. And before you question it, it's more like if I said you didn't make eye contact with them, or you weren't watching them, or you were looking at your phone while they were talking. Those are observations. If I said I didn't see you make eye contact, I didn't see you, I saw you looking at your phone. Those are more observational. Where a judgment, paying attention, is hard to measure. And I'll give you an example of that. How many times have someone said, oh, you're not paying attention to me. And then that person rattles off everything they've said word for word. Right? So I'm paying attention. I may not be looking at you, or I may be doing something else, but I'm paying attention. So you want to be careful because a lot of times it's things that you can measure. And in that case, that's where communication goes off the rails a little bit. And now people start to take it personally. Because if I say to you, well, let's use another example or another question. So you left the shop floor a mess yesterday. You left the shop floor a mess yesterday. All right, so I'm going to end it. I see we have about 25. So if you didn't get to answer, please do. All right, so I'm going to share the results. 64% say that's observation, and 36% says judgment. So someone who said observation, explain why you see that as an observation. If you can unmute, please. There was 16 people that did it. So
Can I change my answer?
why do you want to change your answer?
Because now I'm thinking about it. Did he actually see that person leaving the shop floor a mess?
Well, it's
Now
not
a
even that.
judgment.
Well, let me clarify. So someone who said judgment, can you tell me why you said judgment? Is it a lucky guess, or did you have some rationale?
Is it a personal?
Let me know when you're ready, Gio.
You made a statement that you saw the floor was a mess.
Wait, what's considered a mess?
That's the question.
Very good.
Right. What's considered a mess?
How do you measure a mess? Right. And the reason we do this is because it's so ingrained in our language sometimes, and we've heard it from other people and parents and so the whole point is you can't really measure a mess. Now, so let me clarify that. Let me say, how would I make that a true observation? I would say, when you left yesterday after your shift, the next crew came by and there was a wrench, a hammer, grease on the floor, and something else. That's observable. Okay, but a mess, I really can't clarify what a mess is. And you could say, well, we all know what a mess is. Yeah, but and that's what happens sometimes. And I even hear people like, you left the floor a mess. What do you mean a mess? I left out one thing. So now the issue becomes, you start arguing about the one thing instead of, hey, you left out one thing yesterday. Please try to put everything away. Okay, that's a little bit clearer. And there's less emotion involved because people do get worked up when they're being told that they left the place a mess or they look like a mess. My son comes out of the, getting ready to go out. I would say, you didn't comb your hair. Instead of, look at you, you're a mess. It's slight difference, but it makes a big difference. I'll give you another easy example with kids. When my kids would say to one of my kids, oh, you're annoying. I'm like, stop saying she's annoying. Tell her exactly what she's doing. Well, she's jumping on me while I'm on the couch. Okay, that's observable. And that's something clear I could say. Don't jump on this person while they're on the couch. But if I say stop being annoying, how do you measure annoying? But it's stuff that we've heard and we've said that we start to realize we're using phrases that really aren't measurable. People can't change annoying, people can change actions. All right, people can't change a mess, but they can pick up 3 or 4 things that I tell them to pick up. So it's important to realize that try to use crystal clear language and make sure you're doing something that's observable. And you know what, if someone were to come here and say, you know, did they leave a mess? Well, ask yourself, if I'm giving feedback, is it measurable? Is it indisputable? And if it is, then that's an observation. But if it's something where they can clarify and say, no, that wasn't the case, then that's going to be judgment. Go ahead, question.
Can you say, stop chewing loud, it's annoying?
If you said, you're chewing loud and it annoys me, a little bit clearer, although, yeah, that's going to be tough, but.
So you leave out the word annoying. Can you stop chewing
You would
loud?
want to say, yeah, when you chew loud, it distracts me, or I mean, if you're talking at a table where you're eating, then yeah, it's going to be annoying, or it's rude, or it's, you know, but.
I think the word itself, annoying, has a negative connotation to it.
Of course.
Bothersome.
So that would be it. Can you stop chewing loud? It's very bothersome. Again, to me.
Clarity.
Right. And even, yeah, I mean, that's a tough example too, because either way that someone's going to take that personally.
Right.
You know, but yes, you're on the right track because you use the word annoying and that's it. Sometimes, again, words only mean 7%, but there are words that will set us off, which is actually a good segue into the next topic. But let's do one more. And here's, you know, a phrase that we use all the time. If I say, you know, the computers that they bought for the office were expensive. Let me put up another poll. The computers that we bought were expensive. Right now, I think you're starting to get it. So far, I got 16 out of 16 correct. Oh, careful. Oh, now we got 1. All right, so we're getting there. Actually, 26 out of 46 answered. I'll give another couple seconds. So I'm going to end it, and then I'm going to share the results. So, like I said, you guys were on a roll for a while, and everybody was perfect. So again, the word expensive, how do you measure that? You know, one person's expensive is
It's another person's inexpensive, yeah.
So it's, I spent more than I wanted to, or each computer cost X, or my budget was 300 and we had to pay 350. Those are clear cut. All right. So what's the lesson here? It's just try to be crystal clear in communication. Some of the stuff that we've heard from our managers, from our spouses, from our family, from our parents, you know, in some cases, they're putting judgment to it, and try to remember to pull that away. And you may realize it too now when you start talking to other people that, okay, how do I be crystal clear so they know what to change in their behavior going forward? All right, makes some sense. Questions? Anybody totally disagree? Think I'm crazy? All right, so we're going to move ahead because someone mentioned the word annoying. So there are always going to be words that kind of trigger some people. Although my screen is frozen too. So somebody's note that the screen is frozen. Let me just see if I can. All right, so trigger words to avoid. So there are some statements that are really going to set some people off. All right, and here's an example. Let's even forget about annoying for a second. like I said before, something like if someone was supposed to send me a report and I say to them, you didn't send me the report. It's accusatory, right? And people don't want to hear what they didn't do, but I would say, I didn't see the report, or I may have missed it. Same message, especially if they did send it to you, then you're going to hear about it. And then you're going to, they're going to forward you when they did send it to you. All right. So, and the whole point is too, sometimes when you talk to people, they're like, what's the real difference? Well, the real difference is when I get an email that says, Phil, you didn't do this, that bothers me. All right. I'm less likely to want to play nice with you if you start telling me the things I didn't do. So you should have, especially if you're a customer, well, you should have done this. Customers don't know how to, our policies and our procedures, we do. So you could say something like, here's what you can try in the future, or here's how you might handle it going forward. Adults, which we all are, don't want to hear what we should have done. But hey, next time you may want to try this. Same message, just friendlier language. There's nothing I can do. Again, someone asks for a refund, let's just say. Someone asks you to change something. If you can't do it, that's okay. And I'm unable to. However, what I can try is this. I'm unable, what else can I do to help? Something like that. So it's not word games necessarily. It's just softening your language to be less accusatory and more friendly conversation. No, or I can't. All right, it's not an option. However, here's what I can try. Or you can even throw it back to somebody else. That's not an option that I have. Is there another option maybe that we can work on? That's not our policy. Is similar. We've all been customers, and somebody says that's not our policy. A lot of times, especially if we're in roles where we deal with the customers, and we say, even as a manager, that's not the policy. Of course, it's not the policy, but in essence, in some ways, a customer certainly doesn't want to hear that, because especially when they start thinking logically, like, why is your policy so rigid? And if they present a clear example of, where they should have been able to accommodate, let's just give an example. Refund, you have to pay $10 for a refund. If it's a $12 ticket or something like that, like they spent $12, they're only going to get 2 back. Well, that's our policy. That is the policy, but somebody doesn't want to hear that. They want to at least be, I can understand how, and then start using some of the other customer service skills. However, words like policy may set people off. I'm too busy. Especially if it's someone you work with. And again, if I'm trying to get you to send that report, and they'll be like, oh, I was too busy. Or if somebody asks me that, I would rather say, here's what I have to do. Especially if it's a boss or a manager. Which would you like me to handle first? Because now I'm throwing it back on them. When somebody tells me, oh, I've been busy, I'm like, oh, so you're the busy person that works here. The rest of us are just standing around, So it's like, hey, here's what I've been doing. It's a little more clear. And any negative talk, regardless about another department, agency, person, try to avoid it altogether. Because we know from time to time, if someone says, well, you know how they are over in that department. And if I say, yeah, just trying to avoid the conversation, one day it'll come back that I agreed with them just by saying, yeah, where, you may just say something like, I'm sure they have a lot going on, or I'm sure they're doing their best with, the team that they have, or what have you. But at least it's not necessarily, A, I'm not piling on, and B, I'm not even validating that that team is not doing what they're supposed to do. Questions? Does that make some sense? So we told you what to avoid. Let's look at some phrases that we can use. How do we use softer language? How do we play nice with, colleagues, whatever? How do we communicate better? Phrases like this: my goal is to get us back on track and work together to get the job done correctly. Right. So I'm not, as we look back at that, how do we collaborate? It's not that I'm just giving my point of view or telling you why I want what I want to do, but telling you, I want to get us back on track and work together to get this job done correctly. You know, if someone's, I like that you want to get things done quickly, and I don't want to change that. I want you to place a higher priority on efficiency or even safety. And I'd like us to discuss how you can go about doing this. All right. So let's say they're working fast, but they're making mistakes, or there's a lot of waste, or, you know, they're not being safe. I like that you want to get things done quickly. I don't want to change that. I need you to place a higher priority on, again, even if it's safety, higher priority on safety. I like to discuss how you can do it going forward. You know, instead of just telling them to stop doing what they're doing or work safer, that's a lot clearer. I focus on working out solutions that will help both of us do our jobs effectively. All right. It's not so much what I need, but it's the we. How can we do it together? I want this job done right and safely. I know that's important to you too. Now you're even throwing it out to that other person, you know, even if it's not something they said, but certainly we all want to be safe. We don't want anybody getting hurt. We want everybody to go home, you know, same way they came in. So something like that almost puts it back on them to like, all right, this person gets it, you know, and you're validating their safety as well as your own. You might say, what are some ways we can, and then you throw something that meets their needs in there. So what are some ways that we can get this train moving while at the same time making sure we're doing it safely or the right way or something like that. So it shows that we're working on both goals. And something like, how can we ensure that it's successful for all of us? All right, so if we go back to the beginning when we talk about conflict, a lot of times you're coming from your point of view, I'm coming from mine. I don't understand yours, you don't understand mine sometimes because we never took the time to talk about it. But now we're communicating from a place. Let me know what you have going on. I'll tell you what I have going on. I'll tell you my goals. And, you know, here are some statements we can use that would make that a little bit more effective and get us working together. All right, can you see how something like that could work? Any comments, questions, suggestions? All right, because now it becomes you solving the problem together instead of you solving a problem against. All right, and again, a lot of this comes from the initial communication, you know, and then even looking forward in some way, shape, or form, you know, you appreciate the conflict. You know, I'm glad we worked through this. You know, now we understand each other better. Something like that shows that, all right, we had some conflict, we worked through it, and we're better for it. Communicate optimism. I really think this is going to work. You know, I think both departments are going to benefit, or both of us are going to benefit. You know, when it happens next time, you know, we'll handle it the way we talked about, and we'll check back in and see if it's what we want to do going forward. You know, and if there is, certainly allow for follow-up. If you come up with a new solution, let's say, hey, let's test it a couple times. We'll see if it's working for both of us. If not, we'll change it again. You know, that kind of language and appreciating the difference instead of necessarily, you know, seeing it as a problem does help go a long way. So now we're going to practice a little bit. So those of you that might be high in the weeds here, you're going to have to get involved. So let's have a little quick brainstorming session, though. If we look back to, you know, before we do this, what are some conflicts that you've seen at work? Let's throw out a couple examples. And then what we're going to do is have conversations around that. And I'll say mock conversations where I want you to, you know, practice using some of the stuff that we talked about. This way, when you go out there back to work, you have some kind of practice in a safe space. Go ahead.
I'm a project manager, works a lot on different tasks, and sometimes time. Sometimes there's a need to extend time. A lot of times you don't agree with that. And there's several people on the team, and you're trying to, let someone, they come back and say, hey, we need more time without any backup. And that can be a big conflict. So, or the cost, either time cost or, or costs are two things that usually come into a conflict. That could be for a project or a capital project, resolving that sort of conflict.
Yep, of course. Right. What else? What are some issues that arise at work? And the interesting thing is certainly they run the gamut, right? Sometimes it is a person who chooses to allow it. It is someone who comes in late. And again, just something like, hey, you're always late. Much different than, hey, I noticed you came in X amount of minutes late and I couldn't get started with X, Y, and Z because we're waiting for you. Two definitely different conversations of the same issue. What are some other conflicts that you either observed or have been through? May not even be something you were involved in.
It's Labor Day weekend, and unfortunately, due to inclement weather, we need coverage around the clock. You're all forced to stay.
Yeah, so, and some of this communication is, you can't change the message per se, but you can change how you communicate and how you talk about it. Right.
There's not much you can say with that one.
Well, I mean,
it's all going to be conveyed the same way.
Yep.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, so, is there any, and this is for you to kind of work out too, like, is there any way that we can collaborate and come up with a better solution? Like maybe I'll work longer this holiday and then you work longer the next or whatever. But over time, and again, costs come into some of that. So maybe it's not the best solution. All right, so I just want to make sure we have enough examples, and I have some here also. So let's just say, I have 1 or 2 recruiting examples. Your manager has a lot of faith in you, and this is, again, too busy, right? Continues to add more requisitions to your workload, but this could be anything, more projects, more repairs. Normally you have 20 open requisitions. However, you're at 34. Your colleagues have less than you. You normally don't mind. However, you notice they're only one staying late. Other people seem to be taking longer lunches. This can definitely cause conflict, and it's a real situation. Your manager's on important calls. They're constantly grabbing you to pull you in because you know a lot, but it slows you down. And now they may be taking credit for a few ideas you brought up in one-on-one meetings. All right, so something like that could potentially cause some conflict, right? So what we're going to do, I definitely want some kind of practice here. So that's going to be the important thing. Now, I know some of you have a few people in the room. Which one of you will have to play the role of one party? What we can do? We'll do breakout rooms. Maybe we'll do the same breakout rooms as before instead of necessarily role playing. I do want you to talk about, at least answer the questions on page 12 in the book. What might be creating the conflict? Okay. And they're on the screen here. Identify at least the conflict style that you see that the other person is exhibiting. And you won't have to have a conversation. Maybe we won't necessarily do the role play, but I want you to write some things down that you might say. From the previous pages, certainly some tips that we've used that can help alleviate that conflict. All right, so you don't have to have the conversation, but at least you're preparing the conversation here. But I do want at least one person from each group to share. So we will have I think 6 people reporting out. So when you're in your groups, you know, if everybody wants to talk about the conflict that they have an example of, and, you know, flesh out the ideas for a couple minutes, but talk about what created it, you know, and look at it from viewpoints, like it was legitimate conflict. All right. And a lot of times, as we said, conflict starts as work stuff and then it becomes personal a lot of times. You know, now I start talking about you and what have you, but what created the person, you know, the viewpoint, and identify the style that that person might have been exhibiting, and then what kind of language you use to minimize this conflict. All right, does that make some sense?
How long do you need it for?
Let's say about 6 minutes.
Okay.
Actually, you know what? What time is it? Let's do 10 minutes. This way they can each talk about it, and then they'll come up with one to share. You know, whoever you think in the group has a, you know, can answer those questions the best. Maybe use that example, but I do want you sharing some of this information to show that you understand it. And then when you come back, one person will represent the team. All right, so how did it go? Did you solve the world's problems or what?
Go ahead, Tom. Tell them our conflict.
Uh-oh. So while everybody's still coming back, while everybody's maybe heading back, and you're broken into rooms, I don't know if you realize what room number you are. But being that room 2 wants to start first, I just wanted to verify I did broadcast out. There is a checklist on page 13. So if you are in conflict, it's kind of like a quick checklist of what we've talked about today. Certainly talk to the other party if you need to state the impact of their behavior. Manage your voice and tone, adjust your conflict style, use your observations, avoid some of those trigger words, use those positive intentions, and show appreciation. And again, follow the steps in the 6 steps also, you know, because it will help you resolve this. What about group 1? So it's Daniel, Edward, Joan, Lamar.
Sure. So we talked about an example from my function. I'm a buyer. So we bring in, we buy material and bring it into the storeroom. And there's a specific report that my area generates on a weekly basis to let people know what material has been received at the storeroom, but still needs to be inspected. And until that's done, our vendors can't get paid, and it creates problems if it's not, that inspection process doesn't happen. So the example is that there's a situation sometimes where we reach out to the department that needs to inspect the material, and they may or may not be receptive to contacting who they need to in order to get that inspection process taken care of. So the conflict here, what some of the ideas that we came up for what might create the conflict are that, in this case, I need this inspection done and the report responded to, but sometimes they don't want to, they don't want to do it. And maybe the reason that they might not want to do it is because it either requires a lot of time or a lot of legwork on their end, or they may be having conflicts with the people that they're interfacing with that I'm not seeing, and they may be avoiding that. So we identified the conflict style as avoidant in general, like they're kind of avoiding handling the issue on my end, but also potentially avoiding, confrontation with whoever is on the other end. And we talked through the different phases of resolution, trying to make sure that we both understood what the issues are, that we, clarifying the disagreement, agreeing that the common goal is that we need to have the material inspected, and then talking about ways that we can, resolve the barriers and set an appropriate time frame for responding. That is something we can both agree to, where it wouldn't be that I'm following up with them in a way that's annoying and too soon, and that also, we know that who should be like taking next steps and following up and that sort of thing. So we kind of came up with an idea for that. And I mean, that's generally what we spoke about. We didn't do a whole role play, but we did talk about some of the different issues as we went along and how to make sure that we understood all sides of the perspective, all perspectives. So
that's fine. And I think the big thing too is, that group may not realize that the vendor's not getting paid until you go through it. Or let's just say if something came in and it was wrong, now you may have to reorder, and that's going to take even longer. So things like that. Or even if you're getting, let's say, 5 calls as follow-up because the vendor wants to get paid. These are all things that, you would want to communicate just so they're seeing clearly, because again, other groups don't understand the impact they're having on you unless you communicate that clearly.
Yeah.
So, and let's face it, sometimes it's just, hey, we're too busy, we can't get to it. So, they haven't made it a priority for whatever reason. And sometimes you have to try to communicate the priority, but it may be, especially for that one group who really is the outlier, it may have to be avoiding that conflict because they're clearly not going to pick it up, but again, knowing their vendor's not going to get paid and all that, and how that's going to affect the relationship. All right. It's just that communication piece. Good. All right. Next group 3. So that was Jeanette, Krishna, Meyer.
Okay.
So okay, go ahead, John.
I'll do it. Okay. So we talked about what are the conflict situations we face in that manner as a supervisor and people reporting to you. So the one type of conflict is within one of the team members thinks that they know a lot, not the other people. And sometimes people know a lot, don't share information or knowledge bases others within the group. That's another conflict.
Okay. And
some people try to please the boss. So they bring up situation. Every situation is a bigger situation for them, and refusing, not cooperating with the colleagues rather than bringing everything up to the boss. Creates a conflict situation to the whole group. Those are the 3 aspects I think we discussed about.
Okay. Yeah, and some of those are behavioral, although you would have to think about, again, what's an observation that you can go back to that person with.
Yeah.
And communicate how it affects you. Go ahead.
And another thing we thought about is we are like a diverse organization. People are from different countries, different languages, and sometimes they may not mean it because of the writing skills and the language skills creates a conflicting situation. And people always think this person is hurting me verbally or written words, but that person may not mean to hurt them, but the language abilities may create a conflict situation.
Absolutely right. And that's why at least if you use observation and not judgment, it's when you said this, in my culture, it means to me that X, Y, and Z, that's clear. That's a fact. Where if I throw out a blanket statement like, well, you talk rude to me, and you never thought you talked rude, that's where the problem's going to be. So, again, that would be just a clear example of, thank you for why observation and judgment, why it has to be crystal clear. Because, if you're saying I'm being rude, I use one word that is perceived to be rude. Well, at least you can be factual in telling me, and now I know to avoid that word, So absolutely things to think about. And again, it always comes back to, even if it's somebody's behavior, it's what are they doing specifically that affects you, and how does it affect you? But use the facts. Like when you ask questions in a meeting, now the meeting goes on, for longer than it should. So maybe, they can write them down or something and send them to them, whatever the case may be. But how does it affect you? Because now you're late for another meeting. So how does other people's behavior impact you? All right, good. All right, group 4. This was Brian, Hazel. Let's see who else. Aaron and Sophia. You see, I told you weren't going to be able to hide.
And something's happening, I guess. There's a couple of participants that keep getting kicked out, and I'm sending them back in, but I'm not sure what's going on.
All right. So I'm going to jump over to group. You know what? I'll go back to group 2, right? Well, Thomas, I saw Thomas came back in.
Yeah.
So group 2.
That's us, Tom.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep. Absolutely.
All right. So this is on a little bit of a lighter note, but we were experiencing some technical difficulties. I was supposed to take charge in this group setting, and some my other co-participants thought that I was sabotaging my turn by going on mute.
There you go.
But I had hit unmute on Zoom, but the computer screen was muted, and I was unaware of that. And they thought this was blatant, but it was not.
It's conflict in itself.
Yeah,
Done it before to me.
Yeah.
See,
not
the
on
reputation
purpose.
precedes you.
Yes, I'm very sorry about that. But I tried looking at the settings on Zoom. I left the audio, I came back, and then I saw the little light on the computer, on the bottom of the computer screen that hit unmute. And I was able to unmute, and then everyone was happy that the conflict was resolved.
I told you he'd be back on. I told Phil, I was like, nope, he'll be back on. Give me a minute.
But then when it gave the option to go back to the main group and not out of the team, I got kicked off my desktop, and now I had to log back on my iPad. So that was the second conflict, and I resolved that by now using alternate means of connecting.
Now, all right, so you gave us a good example, right? Because in some cases, if I was on your team, I would say you dropped off on purpose.
Yes.
But I wouldn't want to say that because that's a judgment. So I would say, I saw you got disconnected, right?
Yeah.
That's an observation.
I felt judged.
Well, there you go. So again, whether it's communication after the fact or, but what conflict did you talk about before that happened?
I was muted the entire time.
Really?
I
Okay.
didn't.
So
It was horrible. It was. I was getting madder and madder.
Okay.
Yeah.
So see, and you thought he was doing it on purpose.
Yes. I was waving. I was saying hello.
Well, so did she think you were joking?
I had no idea.
All right. So did you at least use language that was conducive to resolving conflict?
Me?
All right. Yeah.
I just said, really? You did it to me twice?
All right. So there you go. You just want to think about the communication and the language and look at those, terms and stuff like that. All right. Good. That's a great example. Group number 5. Anyone from that group?
Yep, that would be me. I had a conflict actually this morning with another department in reference to someone dragging mops across the floor of the building that I work in, and the material on the mops leaving stains that will not come out the floor. Okay. So I did address the person this morning when I seen them. I think, as far as our conversation went with my group, is the way I addressed it at first. The person, I said, "Hey, you," which I probably should have never said.
Okay.
I should have actually asked him his name.
Right.
In that situation. So I did ask the gentleman, could you please take your mop heads outside, take them off outside, and not drag them through the building, and just put them in a plastic bag outside and put them in the dumpster. That didn't go well. I don't know, we as a group, maybe the way I came off at first and addressed him as, "Hey, you," he already had an attitude. As the conversation went on, I was really smooth. I mean, the whole body thing, the demeanor, whatever, he just didn't want to hear. He got a little irate and he's going off, and to de-escalate it, I just walked away.
Right.
Just walked away from the situation.
Okay.
I left him with his hands up in the air.
Right. All right.
So, tomorrow's another day too. So how do I come on tomorrow? Good morning, find out his name, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think a start could definitely be good morning, and perhaps even acknowledging your fault, because your initial approach, I think anyone would agree, it would immediately have someone in a position to not want to pay attention to anything you're saying subsequently. And even if what you're saying has any merit after the initial approach, I'm blocked now. That's it. I can't hear any words coming out of your mouth. We need to start this over. So I think acknowledging the approach would be pretty awesome. And as you mentioned, just starting over. And I think you could even use those words like, yesterday was yesterday and I started this way. I think we should start over and take in a lot from this class in terms of being specific about what your issue and your concern was. Because that does seem like a concern, like that it's not coming up after he drags this mop through the building. That's unfortunate, but I think you should convey that directly.
Yeah, so if your words were "Hey, you," what was your body language and your tone like?
You're right.
Right.
Imagine.
If you think about it from that point of view.
Right.
I had to have my coffee yet. We're talking 5:30 in the morning.
But actually, it's a good little case study to take a step back and think about. Okay, look at some of the material here and say, how can I approach this tomorrow? And look for what's the win for them. How come even they go that way, or can I give you a garbage bag, leave you a garbage bag every night, so the next morning you put it in the bag before you drag it across, and even drag across the floor, what's going on. So better understanding people would help you resolve it. But certainly, yeah, taking a step back and saying, hey, I apologize for yesterday, and even introducing yourself. Here's who I am. Here's what I do. Here's why his problem of doing that affects your work, So it's really getting to that root, and let me know or let us know what the resolution is. Hopefully,
this class was right on time.
All right, good.
I thought about how to de-escalate the situation, tomorrow, because I know I will run into him in the morning. I see him on a daily basis.
That's the important thing to think about. Conflict seems to happen every day, only because it is truly, a difference of opinion. Doesn't even have to be that you did something wrong to me, but it's, just something that we disagree on. How can we work together so you understand my point of view and I understand yours?
And you would never, really even think, hey, you,
right,
to be so defensive to a person when you approach them,
Absolutely. Good. All right. So I'm glad you learned something. Room 6. All right, that's the last one. So it's Chris, Chaubert, Cynthia, Fabio, Gina, Khalifa, and Mohammed. Example there.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good.
So I brought up an example that we've had a few times here in Staten Island, where employees were being forced for emergency coverage or generator coverage with a very short staff. And it's happened a few times and created a lot of conflict and resentment.
Yeah, so and sometimes those issues are tougher because it's not that there may not be resolution per se, but maybe you work with the group to say, how can we figure this out better? So that.
Yeah, due to the manpower and seniority issues, it's a very tough situation to address. So we discussed maybe identifying what kind of conflict style to use. And each time it happens, it seems like you have to use a different style because the level of conflict is getting greater and greater and greater.
Right.
What I came up with, the best thing I can come up with was to compromise and just be part of the team and volunteer myself to come in with them. So if they had to be miserable, I'm going to be miserable with them. And
yeah,
that's pretty much what we compromised with.
Well, that's it. So you're
not a solution.
Change, right? Because in some cases there is no solution. Although in the conversation, at least you kind of hear each other out and you understand each other. Because maybe there's one day a week that they want to get home to see, their kid or something like that. And maybe that day was the day you can cover. And then it looks a little, then you're both getting what you need. You don't know. But certainly the communication is the key point of this. And that's the goal. So I'll kind of wrap it up that the conflict happens. It's just how we approach it. If I don't understand your point of view, you don't understand mine, we can't both benefit from conflict, right? So in some cases, how do we make it better? And our communication, how we do that, making sure we understand each other is the key part of it.
Yeah.
All right. So we have a couple minutes. Just if you look at the last page, page 14, I think in one way, certainly we've heard some examples, but if anybody else wants to share one or two things that they might do differently now when they leave this class, and if you haven't, really think about that, your style. And sometimes are you ignoring something that you don't want to, but you don't want to bring it up? And how can you change that to benefit you, to bring down your tension or stress or what have you?
Yeah, Philip, this is Darren. Just a takeaway from the class. I'll, be a little bit more specific when you point out, things that weren't done or things that they're not doing the way it ought to be done. And then, be a little bit more pleasant in how you address and approach a person or personnel. A good morning or address them by their name and so forth and so on will definitely help. So that's a takeaway I'll take from this, going forward.
All right, good. Thank you. Anything else to add? All right. Well, I appreciate your time. I think we're going to send out a survey here in the group chat, I believe, unless it's already there. And
it's going to be via email.
Okay, so we'll send it out via email. Just giving feedback on the program. But I think where you have an issue, and if you want to reach out, certainly let me know if you're having a specific issue and maybe you need some other kind of communication help on that. Certainly, if you resolve the issue, especially with the MOP, let us know how it goes and let us know. And the thing is too, where does the learning happen? Learning happens when you leave here and you try it. And maybe you learn something from that. All right, this went well, but I used a judgment. I have to go back to using that observation. So it's not going to happen overnight, but try to change the communication, when you do have a conflict, and see how can you make those conflicts come out where you both benefit from it. And I think that's the main point. All right. Good luck to you. Thank you so much for your time. And again, if you need anything, just shoot us a note. We're here to help.
Thank you.
Thank you.